We want you to be aware so you can't say, oh, I didn't know about it. Well, everything is right here in those two programs, and we hope that you will continue to come out and support the 4th Annual Satchmo Summerfest. We ask you, as a courtesy to our presenters, to turn your telephone and pagers to a vibrating mode, and if anybody needs any housekeeping questions, the bathrooms are located on the left-hand side of the building, out that door on the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd floors. We've got a really interesting panel coming up at this next hour. We're going to have as our interviewer Mr. Michael Cogswell. He's the director of the Louis Armstrong House and Archives at Queens College, New York. And Mr. Cogswell, aside from being a performing musician, is also an educated individual in his area of endeavor, both in jazz history, library science, and he's been at Queens College since 1991, preserving and cataloging Louis Armstrong's vast personal collection of home recordings, tapes, scrapbooks, photographs, and manuscripts. When the Louis Armstrong Archives opened to the public in 1994, Cogswell turned his attention to the restoration of Louis Armstrong's home. This 8-year, $1.6 million project identified Armstrong's home as a National Historic Landmark. And the subject of his interview today will be a lady who was born on 107th Street in Corona, Queens, New York, and has lived in the same house for 81 years. And believe it or not, she lives right next door to the Louis Armstrong Museum. And I'm referring to Miss Selma Heraldo, the neighbor and friend of Louis and Lucille Armstrong. She was a cherished family friend, and she accompanied the Armstrongs on many of Louis's tours. So I'm sure that Mr. Cogswell will be able to get a lot of really enjoyable information that she'll be sharing with us for the next hour. Please welcome Mr. Michael Cogswell and Mrs. Selma Heraldo.
Thank you very much, Michael, for that nice introduction. In case there's any confusion, I'm Michael, this is Selma, okay, on your left. That's right. I thought I brought along a couple of slides just to make it easier for you all to envision what's what. This is a slide of opening day at the Louis Armstrong House. The Louis Armstrong House opened to the public as a museum October 15, 2003. Here's a slide of opening day. I didn't bring it to show off opening day. I brought it so you could see that's the Armstrong House on your left. That's Selma's house on the right. And you can see how close together the houses are. This is very typical for Queens. These houses, what, about 12 feet apart or so. And if you look in front of the front door of Selma's house, there's Selma. If we could have the next slide, please. There's Selma opening day by the Louis Armstrong House. So Selma, as a lot of people in the room know, Louis and Lucille Armstrong moved to Queens in 1943 and lived there for the rest of their lives. How did that come about? Well, you were involved in that.
You want to know about how did we meet? Or did the whole thing?
How did Lucille find the house? How did you meet? Yeah, you tell us.
Lucille Armstrong, who is his wife, she formerly lived in Queens, near where they move now, but I'll tell you about that story. And so when she became, what do you want?
They were married in 42.
They were married in 42, and they bought the house in 43. But how they got the house, I live right next door to this same house, but I was there before them. So therefore, my mother, Mrs. Armstrong's mother, and my aunt, they were all friends from church. So my mother and Mrs. Armstrong's mother were out, and she said, you know, we used to live in Corona, and we're living in New York and Manhattan now. We want to come back to Corona. Do you think you could find a house for us? My mother said to them, I have the right house for you, right next door to me. So the neighbor and the house that they bought, there was Irish people, but I was raised up with them. We lived in one another's houses. My mother looked for me at night, I'm in their house. So it ends up, my mother said, I have the house. She called the man who owned the house, whose name was Jimmy Brennan. So she called Jimmy, and she said to Jimmy, listen, you're trying to sell your house? I think I have a buyer. So he said, all right, Adele, was my mother's name. Said, okay, Adele, when I come home, I will talk to you. So my mother and him talked, and he spoke to Lucille, which is Louis's wife, and she turned around, and they negotiated. That's how they got the house. And it was right in, the house is in the neighborhood where she formerly, as a young girl, before she started dancing, and what do I want to say? What do I want to say?
Yeah,
Lucille, she decided she wanted to come back into the neighborhood. So that's how she speculated, and she liked the house.
Right. And they bought this house in 1943 and
yeah.
moved in, and then they lived there for the rest of their lives. Louis passed away upstairs in that house the early morning hours of July 6, 1971. Lucille continued to live there. She passed away suddenly in '83, and now today the house is a museum, unchanged. Nothing's been moved since the Armstrongs' time. So do you remember your first meeting with Louis, the first time you met him when he moved in?
Well, my first meeting, that was a long time ago. What are you asking me? I'm an old lady. You want me to remember that? But in the meantime, being that she had moved in and her mother, and we were all big, and we were family, we were friends, and so it ends up, I expected her husband, Louis Armstrong, to come home. And they were speaking about Louis Armstrong. Who did I know Louis Armstrong was? He was just another man. And so, finally, he decided, I want to say, Louis played 365 days in a year, and he was only home approximately 30 days out of the whole year. So he came home one of those nights. I don't know nothing about it, but he came. And then, from then on, we became close with him, and he fell in love with my mother as a mother. So therefore, then we became very close. That's all.
So we've heard, and we'll hear some more, many great presentations all weekend. Louis is a trumpet player, and Louis is a vocalist, and Louis on film. I mean, there's a lot of great stuff. But you knew him in a much different way. Louis is a next-door neighbor. Would he drop by, or what was it like?
Oh, well, yes, he came by. I mean, he was the type of person, when he was in, he wanted to be plain. He didn't dress. He put on his slippers and his socks and shorts, and and his handkerchief. And then he would be okay. He was all right. So therefore, I was glad to know who he was, but I didn't know who Louis Armstrong. At my age, that time I was Lindy Hop, and I wasn't doing that dance.
If we could have the next slide, please. Now, this is Louis and your mother. Adele, right?
Yes, that's my mother.
Right, that's
That-
on the,
That's the lady that saw that he got a house.
I understand that Louis had a favorite dish that she would make for him.
Well, whenever he was home, and they would go out, and they would come home late at night. But when you are in this type of business that he was, you don't go to bed early. You go to bed late. So when he would come in, and he would be, he wasn't ready to go to bed. So he decided he and Lucille gonna ring Mom's bell. So that hour of night, my mom say, "Who is that but that blessed Louis?" You know? So she said, "Come in." So he said, "Listen, Mom, I'm so used to that fancy food downtown, and I'm tired of that fancy food. Will you please cook me an egg sandwich and give me a cup of tea?" So that went on constantly with him and my mother, with that blessed egg sandwich and a cup of tea. And then my mother loved to cook, so therefore she would cook for him, and she would fix fancy dishes for he and Lucille. It wasn't that alone, you know. So that was the way it was with my mother and him.
Now, you had more experiences with Louis than just a next-door neighbor. You actually went out on the road with him, right?
Yes.
How did that come about?
One evening I had a job, but I wanted to go over to the house to see Lucille and I don't know, and things like that. So while I was over there, Louis says to me, he says, "Listen, would you like to go and travel with Mom, Lucille, on the road with me? Because I have no time to be holding her hand." So I said, "I can't go with you. I have a job. I'm not losing my job for you." I didn't know who he was. So I said, no. So I'll put it like this. You see where my house is and his house. I hadn't jumped the fence to go into my house before he had called my mother and father to find out could I travel with him. So I still argued I had a job, but I didn't know his celebrity part. So I just didn't pay it any attention. And so then my dad spoke to me and he said, that would be the best opportunity you'll ever have in your life to travel. So I turned around and I went to my job and I told them, and the manager said, "Louis Armstrong? Oh boy, you dealing?" I said, "Yeah, I'm dealing." So that's it. All right.
So where did you go? Where did you go?
I did the 48 states plus Mexico and Canada with him. I had the most, I'm glad I quit the other job. That other job didn't do nothing for me. And so, so I met some wonderful people. I met such gorgeous people, men, women, and one of mine is right here, one of my friends, George.
I'm your sweetheart.
Okay.
For those of you in the back, we're talking about George Avakian, the great producer for Columbia Records. George, stand up. That's good.
And I met so many lovely people.
Well, who was in the band at that time when you went out?
When I went out on the road with him, I had Bonnie Bogard, I had Sid Catlett, I had Jack T. Garden, I had, who else? I had Velma, the singer, And I had who else?
Maybe Earl Hines?
Yes, I had Earl Hines. And while I was traveling on the road with them, I thought I was grown, but they treated me like I was a baby. I couldn't cross a T and cross an I unless they looked and knew what I was doing.
Well, what was that like? Much of the public knows Louis on stage and sees all the, the celebration, but back in the hotel room and the band, that's a different scene, right?
Yes, it's a bit different scene. He was a very, very loving man, very generous man, and he was a comedian too, besides a musician. And no matter where we went on the road, he was loved by everybody. And I don't know how to explain it to his generosity and his lovingness, So, I don't know what else to tell you.
I understand that Louis traveled with a lot of handkerchiefs.
Oh, okay. Louis was very articulate. Everything had to be just so. But Louis used 100 to 150 white handkerchiefs every day. Not one, and I'm not saying 10. I said 150. Well, I found out why he wanted me to help go on the road with them, because so at that particular time, we didn't have any laundromats at the time, but Louis was always he found famous things or things that were just coming on. So they found a little portable washing machine. You know about that big? They took that on the road. Then they had an iron board between myself and his manager. We had to get those handkerchiefs out every day. So today we would be in Chicago, and we get to Chicago. Well, here I go with my washing machine. Wash the machine, wash it. Then I have to put the handkerchiefs, go to your room, put them on the radiator so they could dry, so I can iron them. And that's just the way it did. That's what I did. And so I know how to iron a handkerchief, don't worry.
Now, we heard in the previous presentation, Mr. Baptiste was talking about Carnival, 1949.
Yes.
Louis Armstrong was here. You were along too, weren't you?
Yes, I was here. I was on the road at that time. I traveled with Louis from 1949 to 1952. And I happened to be fortunate enough when he was the king of the Zulus down here in 1949. And that's when I had a ball. I really enjoyed that, and I was with him. And that's when I really fell in love with New Orleans, because you eat, and you jump up, and you have a good time, And oh boy, I got a little drunk,
And
I was with his wife, but she was very generous too. And they were not hard people to work for. It was just a matter. And so she and I were here, and we were riding around on the floats, and but I make it laugh. We thought each time we went out on the road, and he received a plaque, or he received some sort of a present, we would always send it home to my mother. So she would keep everything until we got home. So this particular morning, the night of the next day of the Mardi Gras, we took the costume and everything, and we wrapped it up, and so I had called my mother and told her, Mom, we're bringing home the Louis the Zulu things. Lo and behold, the man comes and says, it was borrowed. I couldn't take it home.
It's King of the Zulu costume.
Yeah, it's King.
On loan, right.
Yeah, I had already told my mom, come, Mom, we're gonna have it. And here the man come tell me that I can't have it. So
Well, this traveling, going out on the road with Louis Armstrong, that must have been a real eye-opener for a young lady from New York City, right? You lived your whole life in New York City. It was different for you, right?
it was different for me, and how could I say? It was,
Were there difficulties like traveling in the South? And that
yeah,
sort of
I come from New York. I knew nothing about segregation, but traveling with Louis, I did. I found it. My first, with him, I went to Las Vegas. When we went to Las Vegas, I found out the fellas in the band, their wives, and anything of color, we could not go in the casino. I didn't know nothing about that. So then we had a Louis' manager. His name was Frenchie, and he made it so that he told, when I had to go to the hotel, he said he would have to call in the front to tell them that the dressmaker is coming. Now, I'm a fool. I don't know what he's talking about, the dressmaker. The idea was that I could go to the front door. Other than that, I had to go in the back door. So I went in the back door because I wasn't going to be any different than anyone else. So then I learned it. Another time I learned about segregation. Louis had to hire, or however they went, hired a complete car. You know, what do you call it?
Like you talking about a railroad car?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had
Pullman car.
Pullman car. We had a Pullman car, and we got everything, but we were right in the front. The smokestack. I couldn't understand that foolishness. I didn't know nothing about that, but I had to accept it. And
I understand even you and Lucille going out shopping.
oh, well, Lucille and I, we went. She was the same height as me. She was the same, we wore the same size shoe. And so I think that's why we got along too, you know. I live rich. So we went down and we saw a hat that we liked. We went in the store and the man says, yeah, you can have the hat, but you got to put on the white thing so that we had to put on the white cap inside the hat because they said that they didn't want grease and they didn't want this and that. We couldn't have it. So we didn't fool with them people. We bought the hat, whether it fit us or not. For the shoes, they told us the shoes, we couldn't wear those shoes. Couldn't buy those shoes. What do you mean? We got the money. So he turned around, with our size, give us the shoes. I don't fool with those people with the segregation.
Now, you mentioned Velma earlier, that Velma Middleton was the singer in the band at that time.
We was up in Canada. That's a joke. We were in Canada, and we had to come, we were coming home across the border. So I didn't have any particular time that I had to be ready, as long as I got to the next stop. So when Velma, which was the singer, she was beautiful. She was a pretty, but she was stout and she was lovable.
She's about 300 pounds. She was a big, big woman, right?
And I'm still
Right.
the same size.
Right.
That's right. So when Velma came down, I learned later that the guard, you know, what do you call it?
The crossing guard from
Yeah, the border,
Canada
yeah.
to the United States.
Says to her, "Where's your twin?" She said, "What are you talking twin? I don't have a twin." He said, "Where's Selma?" See, her name was Velma, and my name was Selma. See? But he didn't see. So he said, she said, "What are you talking about a twin? I don't have no twin." He said, "Where is Selma?" She said, "I'm going across. She'll come down and you'll see what she looked like." Well, I come down around 2:30 in the afternoon or 3 o'clock. Well, they started laughing. They looked me up and down. What are you laughing? But I don't want to talk too bad because I don't want to stay up there. I want to come home. So they started laughing, and they made a joke because they had thought, when they looked at me, skinny, and Velma big, that they knew that we were no twins.
You mentioned that you and Lucille wore the same size clothes. I should tell the folks, as I said before, the Armstrong house is completely furnished. Everything's the way it was when the Armstrongs lived there. And Selma inherited some of Lucille's clothes, her dressing gown and nightgown and beautiful pair of slippers. And she very graciously donated those items to the Louis Armstrong House Museum just a few nights before we opened. So visitors who come to see the Armstrong house, they go through the Armstrong house, they get to the master bedroom, and we point out, here's Lucille's dressing gown and nightgown and slippers on the chair there. I mean, it really makes the house come alive to have those types of artifacts, and that's all due to Selma.
I enjoyed doing
Yeah, we'll talk to that.
it. It doesn't hurt to be kind. You could be nice. Don't worry about nothing.
Now, getting back a little bit to life on the road, I mean,
Yes.
I don't think it's a secret anymore that Louis was a marijuana smoker. Did he ever encounter that when you were traveling with him?
What do you got to tell everybody's business? Well, I didn't do it, but I heard that he did it, and so therefore I was caught. But I never saw him do it. But when we used to travel on the road, we used to have to travel by bus in some instances, you know? So I would always sit in the front with Frenchie, who was the manager, and I'd sit there. And all of a sudden, I would start laughing. I was laughing like a fool. And I stand up. The boy said, "Uh-oh." Now Louis had nicknamed me Dynamite. He had already, right from the beginning, he named me Dynamite. So right away, they said, "Uh-oh, Dynamite is high." So what are you talking about, I'm high? They said, "Boy, that stuff is gotta." But the smoke, I got contact high. I was contact high. So I didn't pay that much attention. So we got into Chicago, and Louis believed in health. I mean, medication, teeth, everything. He was I don't know what good kind of nick you call him, but anyway, I had a toothache, and he sent me to the dentist. So I turned around, and I went to the dentist and had the toe drawn. So I came back, but I learned, if you ever travel, don't live on the same floor as your boss, because the boss will call you when you don't want to be bothered. So I lived on like the 8th floor, and they lived like on the 3rd floor. So I came to tell them that I had had the extraction. So Louis was famous for his handkerchiefs. He used them for anything. So I went, and he was getting ready to, I don't know what. But anyway, I said I had the two. So now, this is when I found out what a reefer looked like. Yeah, marijuana looked like. I don't know before. So he says, take this. I say, no, I can't smoke that. No. He says, take it. I said, not me. I ain't taking that. That's no good. I'm sitting there. I'm scared, though. I'm scared. So I take this, and he gives it to me. And I take and I mash it all up in the ashtray. Then I run away and went home. I didn't use it, you know. Well, they tell me that Lucille told me that he cursed me and named me everything because I ruined up his money. He said, can you imagine? So I was scared to go to see him for a few days because he didn't like it. So then Lucille told me that he gathered it up and fixed it up because he said that was plenty of money. He wasn't going to let me waste his money. So that's a story with that.
Now, another wonderful thing that Selma gave us was a beautiful scrapbook that she had lovingly compiled over many years. And in the scrapbook, if we could have the next slide, please. I don't know if you can see it clear from there. We got to focus it maybe a little bit. There we go. It's Satchmo stationery, and Lewis has written on here, have a little drink with Lucille and Satchmo.
Yeah.
Now, what's the story on that?
It was, Louis was very generous. So, I mean, when he came in, everybody knew that he was going to get $50 or $25 because, so, in the meantime, that is that he had fixed an envelope for my mother. And he sent it over by the housekeeper for my mother. And he said, and in that, and that's what it was, and it was $50. But he was very, very generous. He, no matter who it was, he gave, and he really, and he was always given, you know. So that is a note that he gave my mother, you know.
Now, you mentioned the guys in the band and Velma that you knew.
Yes.
Lucille, of course, you were very close to.
Yes.
Lucille was Lewis's fourth wife.
Yes.
Did you meet any of the other wives? Meet Lil?
Yes, I did meet Lil. I met Lil while I was traveling on the road with them because whenever we went to Chicago, Lucille and Louis were friendly with Lil, who was his second wife. So, and she was a very sweet lady. So, now, you want me to tell you about the closeness. It ends up, when Louis died, Lucille was still with my mother. My mother and her was real close. But anyway, she called my mom, told my mom to come, and my mom went over and she said, Mom, I want to have Lil to the funeral, and I don't want to have the funeral without Lil. Do you have any room for her? My mother said, call her up and tell her to come. She's sleeping in my house. So see, we lived next door, and she stayed in my house for the funeral and everything else, you know? She was such a nice lady, you know?
Well, I think I'd like to share questions with the audience instead of me continuing to ask questions. I know there must be some good questions out there. We still have the mic that's going around? Or? Okay.
Test.
When I left home?
Yeah, when you decided to
The question was, how old was Selma when she
I
went
was
on the road? with the Armstrongs?
26. I'm 81 now.
81.
I'm 81. I lived in the same house next door to them that my father was raised in. So I'm there, and the house is, and I'm still there. 81 years. So I know all the creaks and crooks of the house.
Thank you for sharing.
You're
Hi.
welcome.
Hi, Selma. I met you on the Louis Armstrong tour, so it's good to see you again.
Thank you.
But there was a story about the bricks, about how Louis donated renovation of different houses on the block. Can you tell me how the neighbors reacted, and did they
Well,
think...
the neighbors reacted to the point that Lucille was there, and she was just dressed plain and everything else. But Louis, they were renovating the house. They were renovating everything. So Louis fell in love with my mother. So he said he wanted our house to be bricked the same as his. And so he bricked the whole house and put this shrubbery and things like that. That's how come. And but
How did everyone in the neighborhood react? I mean,
in the
they
next.
say thank you, Louis.
What? No, he didn't do everybody's brick. He only did mine. I'm lucky he did mine. No, to tell you the truth, the neighborhood was it's a mixed neighborhood, but we're all family. Each one of us know one another. I'm the grandmother of the block now, you know. They don't do nothing. They gotta have a list for me when I get back home. And, no, they were just neighbors. No one knew that he was. I didn't know he was a celebrity till he died. And then all the big shots came. You know, the judges and the lawyers and the president and everything. I didn't know he was important.
Is there another question out front? I know there's another question out there.
All right. I can go now? See you later. Thank you very much for listening.
Can find us off. Selma, did you cook for Pops?
No, I can't cook for myself. No, I didn't cook for Pops, but my mother did. And my mother loved to cook, and he loved to eat. So no, I don't know how to cook. If you're looking for a wife to cook, you forget me.
Tell you what, Selma, I can cook some red beans and rice for you, though.
I've had a lot of them since I've been here.
Yeah. Now, so tell me about the block in general. How about the kids?
The children in the block, in the beginning, you know, when he came home, and it was so seldom, he came out and joined the children. He'd sit on the step and things like that, and then he would talk to them and tell them to go to school and different things. Then he would buy ice cream for them, and then he would invite them in the house or backyard. But the neighborhood in the beginning did not know who he was. But our neighborhood has now changed. We're all loving, and they know now about the museum. And now the kids found out because Mr. Cox, how do you put it, Mike? We have 3 days in May that he has all the community schools, and they have what they call Tops is Pops. Pops is Tops?
Pops is Tops.
Yes. And now they have learned, and we have 3 or 4 schools in our area that's named Louis, after Louis. One is in the back of us we live on 7th, and that's on 13th, and then they have another IS 227. Yeah, but I don't know. everybody's loved, so they don't even know, they don't know the difference.
What, just to build on what Selma just said, thanks to Selma's influence and other community influence, I mean, we are a community organization, and we put on free concerts for kids in the neighborhood every year. In fact, this is our 18th year, even though we just opened to the public last fall. We have free concerts for kids in the neighborhood every May for 3 days. We hire from the community, about 70% of our staff. Most of our tour guides are from the neighborhood. We send people out to eat in the neighborhood. We have a little list of local restaurants. I mean, this is Louis' neighborhood. When you're coming to visit the Armstrong house, you're coming to visit Corona, Queens. Another question out there.
Yes.
Yes.
Could you tell me a little bit about that last birthday party in 1971, like a lovely moment or something?
His last birthday? His last birthday, he wasn't doing very well. He wasn't feeling good. So his famous mother, my mother, baked him a cake with 71 on it. And Mrs. Armstrong, Lucille, her sister, brought her godchildren there. They did not have anything big. They didn't have any party or anything, but Lucille did the cooking. And therefore, we could climb the fence back and forth. So that was what happened. And then my mother presented Louis the cake in the alleyway. You know what an alleyway? I don't know if you all know, I know. But handed it over, and they had a good time. But then 2 days later, he passed away for but that was it, yes.
Yes.
Just out of curiosity, whenever the U.S. Open is on, the tennis open at Louis Armstrong Memorial, John McEnroe, the last couple of years or so, I've just noticed, seems to make a point of saying that Louis preferred to be called Louis instead of Louis. Is there anything at all to that?
The gentleman asked kind of a two-part question. I'll repeat it for the folks in back. One is the U.S. Open, many of the tournaments are played in Louis Armstrong Stadium. And John McEnroe comments upon Louis preferred to be called Louis rather than Louis. Discovered in the house were 650 reels, a home recorded tape. Louis loved these reel-to-reel tape recorders. And about half of those are dubs of favorite LPs and 78s. Half are spoken word tapes. He put the tape recorder on record and just let it roll. On those tapes, those home recorded tapes, we have Louis referring to himself as Louis and as Louis. We have Lucille referring to him as Louis and
Or
Louis.
Pops.
Or Pops. So either one's correct, or either one's correct.
He accepted anything. He said you didn't have to call him Louis, you call him anything.
But the tennis,
Yeah.
the tennis stadium is another example of what Selma was just talking about tributes from the community to Louis Armstrong. Correct me if I'm wrong, Selma. I understand that not too long after Louis passed, there was a proposal to rename Northern Boulevard, the big east-west
they wanted
road.
to,
They
they
wanted to
couldn't.
rename it Louis Armstrong Boulevard, and Lucille said, no, that's too ostentatious. You know,
Yeah, she
that's
didn't care
that's not
for
right
that,
for
no.
Louis. So there are two schools in the community named Louis Armstrong School. The stadium where the U.S. Open was used to be the Singer Bowl. It was renamed the Louis Armstrong Stadium in 1973. Then later, the United States Tennis Association took it over and became the home for the U.S. Open. So, but when you see, and this is just coming up in a few weeks, when you see the U.S. Open on television, that stadium is just a little more than 7 blocks from the Armstrong
From
house.
the Armstrong
Very
house.
close to us.
You can walk. I'm not
Fact-
going to look for you,
fact-
but you can walk.
That whole park there, that Flushing Meadows Corona Park, I mean, Louis had a gig in there, right? World's Fair, didn't he play there? And
Maybe
walk-
so, I don't know. I'm
yeah,
not quite
yeah,
sure.
He used to walk to work. there.
Oh, don't talk. Oh, yeah,
No,
walk there.
That's right. Yeah, he would walk down 37th Avenue to go to work.
Yeah.
We have one more question, then we got to wrap it up. Yes.
When you first met him, with all of his equipment that he had, with him giving his stories on reel-to-reel tape and everything, did he give you a lot of stories about his childhood?
I tell you the truth, you know, when you are friends and you're together, sometimes you don't even, what people think you would talk about, you don't. You know, he talked about New Orleans, he talked about Mama Lucy, he talked about and he talked about his sisters and things like that, you know, in general, but not to say, just sit down and talk about it. But he talked to those he wanted. Do you know that the barber shop that he used to have his hair cut, the barber is still there. And the barber shop is 106th Street, and we live in 107th Street. And the barber shop is still there, and called Joe's Barber Shop, yeah.
Well, folks who come to the Louis Armstrong house for tours, what happens about once a day or so, Selma will drop in and hold court, sit in the gift shop and tell stories. And of course, for those lucky people who happen to come at that hour on those days, it's a real treat for them to hear Selma's stories. Selma, only in recent years, has started sharing a lot of this because you don't gossip about your next door neighbor, you know, you don't talk about that. And only in recent years has Selma really been sharing her
I got some I wouldn't tell
closeness.
you.
Right. Will you tell me later, a couple of those?
No, you might tell somebody.
Oh, okay, all right. But Selma, I'd like to thank you for coming down to New Orleans and sharing
Oh.
your stories.
And on behalf of the 4th Annual Satchmo Summer Fest, we want to...
I just want to say
Good.
one thing. I want to thank all of you, everybody that's here, everyone that I've seen, met. Everybody's been so lovable to me. I think I might move down.
What am I? No, you can't do that.
We want to thank Ms. Selma Heraldo and Mr. Michael Cogswell for that very interesting presentation, and let you know that in a couple of minutes, Mr. Bob Kester is going to be here to share with you